Good afternoon, Oki. I want to acknowledge we're gathered on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 7, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. Alberta is in a unique situation, possibly a place we've never found ourselves before. Albertans are still struggling. The cost of living has increased dramatically and our healthcare system is overwhelmed. All of this is happening at a time when the province is collecting record resource revenue. But despite these high energy prices, we aren't seeing the jobs boom in the energy industry like we have in the past. Instead, Albertans are falling further behind as the province faces the slowest wage growth in the country. And right here in Calgary, the city faces the highest downtown office vacancy rate and highest unemployment rate in the country. So in summary, our province is facing instability, uncertainty, and several challenges, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. But in a province blessed with natural resources and a highly skilled workforce with a driven and entrepreneurial spirit, we have an opportunity to address these challenges facing Albertans, restore stability, and build a more resilient economy. And for more on that, I'll turn things over to Todd Hirsch.
Thank you, Shannon. Last fall, during a year the province was going through truly extraordinary non-renewable resource revenue, Rachel approached me with an idea. It was an idea to deliver a report how Alberta can use the resource revenue coming into the province to stabilize our finances and public services, as well as generate long-term prosperity for Albertans. It was based on 5 principles: addressing the affordability crisis, repairing the damage done to our public services, and build a more diversified and resilient economy. All the while getting the best return on investment and understanding this revenue stream is unpredictable at best. It was no easy task, especially given that Alberta has struggled with this question for generations. I knew I didn't have all the answers, so I consulted with experts on how we could achieve these goals. After consulting with 37 different individuals and organizations, I'm happy to present my report. There are 8 recommendations in total. I hope these recommendations would serve any political leader well, and they're designed to be taken into government and operationalized. The very first recommendation, and I think the most important, is for the province to use a fixed amount of natural resource revenue for its base budget. Any resource revenue above the threshold would create a surplus, and I recommend that this surplus be allocated based on a fixed formula. These 2 recommendations are critical to ensure we don't squander resource surpluses driven by extraordinary non-renewable resource revenues. Let me say a few words about economic diversification. In my view, we should not pursue economic diversification simply for the sake of it. Economically, the most diversified province in Alberta is arguably Manitoba. It has a uniquely balanced economy, including agriculture, hydroelectric energy, manufacturing, services, and government. Yet, it is not typically held up as an example of an ideal economy. Rather, our goal in Alberta is to maintain prosperity, stability, and dynamism. The diversified economy alone is not a sufficient element to get us there. To achieve these goals, it will require investments in healthcare, quality of life and the care economy, education, training, and skills development, environment, renewable energy, and climate change mitigation, agriculture and food security, and finally, technology and innovation. Therefore, included in this report are fiscal recommendations that ensure we budget responsibly while investing in the future. Finally, there are some additional recommendations that are designed to help guide good fiscal decision-making. These include consciously determining a goal and purpose for the Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund, maintaining an outer bound limit of a net debt GDP ratio of 30%, and providing transparency around our return on investments to ensure Albertans' money is spent prudently. It was a big task to put this report together, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to do it. These 8 fiscal recommendations can help position Alberta for success. But now, the hard work begins. We need our political leaders to take these recommendations into government and operationalize them. Thank you, and I will now turn things over to Rachel Notley.
Well, let me begin, of course, by offering my thanks to Todd for all of the work that you've put into this report. And thank you, Shannon, for being part of this as well. And I also want to thank everyone who provided their input during the consultation process. As Shannon mentioned, Alberta finds itself in a unique position. This province is taking in record amounts of resource revenue, but Albertans aren't feeling it. Every day, I hear from Albertans who are struggling to keep a roof over their head or food on their table. And meanwhile, Alberta families can't find a family physician, and in the case of an emergency, they don't even know if an ambulance will show up. At the same time, we aren't seeing the jobs of previous resource booms as our economy undergoes significant changes. In fact, Alberta's unemployment rate is higher than the national average, capital investment growth is amongst the slowest in the country, and there are fewer businesses open now than when the UCP first took office. It's within this context of Albertans falling further behind, a crisis in healthcare, and a changing economy, all at a time of record resource revenue, that I asked Todd to prepare a report to address the immediate issues facing our province and set us down the path of long-term prosperity and security. Not only did Todd graciously accept, he delivered. Now, I will say that economic conditions have actually changed since I asked Todd to write the report because, of course, we've seen oil prices moderate. But as we know, these prices are volatile. They can turn on a whim. And we can't squander this boom or kick the can down the road and pray for another one. We need to put a framework in place now that prepares us for the future. I accept all 8 recommendations in the report. One of the first tasks for my new finance minister through a mandate letter that I will deliver will be to ensure that we define how much non-renewable resource revenue will be used for base budgeting purposes. The second will be to launch consultations to define the purpose of the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Third will be to define the fixed formula for how surpluses should be allocated. And while not in the report, I want to be clear that Albertans can expect a balanced budget in our upcoming platform. For too long, Albertans have ridden the resource revenue roller coaster. Governments of the past have spent resource revenue as fast as it came in, only to drastically pull back spending when prices go down. It's time to get Alberta off that roller coaster. This report provides a path on how we can get there, and if elected, we will get to work on implementing the recommendations so we can finally bring long-term stability to Alberta's finances, build a more resilient economy, and also build a better future for all Albertans. So I'm happy to take any questions folks here might have.
Okay, we'll start in person, then go to the line. If you don't mind coming around here for the mic so everyone else can hear.
Sorry. Thanks, Ms. Notley. So how much do you think, how much of the resource revenue this fiscal or last fiscal do you think that the UCP should have spent?
Well, again, as I say, what we need to be doing is sitting down and doing the work to establish a number. This report doesn't establish a number, and I don't come to the table yet with a final number established. We're going to need to do that work. But listen, I will say something. You know, when we were in government, non-renewable resource revenue averaged to our budgets at around $3.5 billion a year. Last year, this government had $27 billion, and we ended up with a surplus of about 10. And the fact of the matter is that going forward, when we have this kind of volatility, if we have a better understanding of the frame for how to manage that, we are likely to get better outcomes for Albertans, better investment outcomes, greater stability, and better long-term planning. But no, I haven't come up with a hypothetical number yet, but I do believe that there is strong merit in establishing that number. And I think there's value to establishing an actual number as opposed to a percentage, because a percentage just leaves us volatile. You're still dealing with the same volatility because it's a percentage of the volatility, as opposed to setting a solid number, adjusting for inflation and other things. The formula itself allows for some flexibility, but by establishing the formula, you try to remove that volatility from the budget overall.
Do you have certain provisions? I mean, if you could set it, and you know what the roller coaster's like. You could set it at, we're only going to take $10 billion, say, and then things dip. Do you pull back if there's a risk of a deficit?
I think that again, as I say, there's a bunch of different principles, and obviously we don't want deficits, and it depends on what would be driving that situation. We're going to plan not for a deficit, and that's how we're going to write the budget. And we would, once we set that number, that budget would take into account what will ultimately be a relatively conservative, non-renewable resource number. We're not going to build a budget on the basis of $27 billion, for instance. And as I say, we have experience building budgets on the basis of $3.5 billion. So, as I say, we can't predict the future, and I'm not here to roll out our full budget, but just rather to say that the sound principles that Todd has laid out in terms of constructing a predictable frame for managing this unprecedented volatility in our province's revenue streams, we accept the frame that he's put in place, or that he's recommending.
The 30% debt to GDP ratio, could seem to some people, and it was double what it was under Joe Cece's budgets, could seem to somebody as a target. And people could construe, looking at it quickly, they're going to triple the debt load.
Well, the 30% number is actually one that Travis Taves himself had in place. So we are actually using the UCP's number on that front, and it's still considerably lower than the debt to GDP ratio in any Western democracy. So it's a very conservative number, but no, it is certainly not our expectation to hit that number. But it's an outer bound, but it's a safe outer bound, and it's one that even the UCP acknowledged was a reasonable one.
Okay, we'll go to questions on the line. First question goes to Michelle Bellefontaine.
Folks on the Zoom call, it is really hard to hear, so I'm sorry if I maybe asked something that has been asked earlier. Rachel, I want to get your reaction to something else. We're hearing, of course, we heard this morning that Travis Taves is not going to run in this election, and now we've also heard that Sonia Savage is not going to run. And I'm wondering what this signals to you about the state of the UCP heading into the election.
Well, let me begin by saying, obviously Travis Taves conducted himself with a lot of decency, but there is a strong case to be made that he's probably the worst finance minister the province has ever had. Notwithstanding that, both Mr. Taves and Ms. Savage are amongst the most capable cabinet ministers that this UCP government has seen over the last 4 years. And the fact that they are both leaving reveals, I think, the fact that Danielle Smith is not attracting a team that Albertans can count on to run a capable, responsive, competent government.
Is there a follow-up, Michelle? Okay, no more questions online. We can go back to questions in person.
Actually, let me go to one off-topic one. I'll get back on topic. Your campaign manager has been in the news a fair bit this past week as chair of, or head of policy for Eastern Canada for Airbnb. Are there going to be? Do you see any issues of conflict or anything with your campaign manager, given that you will be should you win, you will be regulating rental accommodation policy as well potentially?
I think, let me first of all say that my heart really goes out to all the folks in Quebec who were impacted by that tragic fire, especially the families of those who were lost in the fire. The potential future campaign manager, who's not currently a campaign manager, is currently an employee of Airbnb, and should he take on the role of campaign manager when the writ is dropped, he will be on a leave of absence from there. So I don't see any concerns with that, but there are rules, conflict of interest rules in place that require disclosure or require people not to be involved on certain matters, and we're happy to completely follow those, absolutely.
Back on the report, Todd Hirsch extols the virtues of, or the potential to basically the benefits of saving instead of paying down debt, given where interest rates are, given where savings potential could be. I know that Quebec has begun doing this with the Generations Fund. Mm-hmm. Is that something you'd like to pursue, or where do you come down on that one?
Well, I think, and I'll happily let Todd jump in here. I don't think it's an either. I don't think it's necessarily an either or. I think that obviously paying down debt is the most secure use of excess funds. There are often cases, though, where it is not the most productive, like you don't get the return that you could otherwise get. And so whenever, in any given case, you need to be balancing security against investment potential. And that's why one of the things that I really liked about what Todd was writing about was this obligation to report regularly and transparently on those different measures, the ROI as it relates to stability at any given point. So obviously, if the debt was at a certain height, then definitely the value of paying it down would be greater than if it was much lower, and meanwhile we had massive interest rates elsewhere, and we weren't paying them on our debt. So depending on the circumstances, there's going to be that balancing, and that's what he talks about. Going forward, though, I think the ideas around the endowments are very exciting, and we're really interested in that. And again, with respect to the debt versus savings issue, it's one of those things where I think having a regular, transparent conversation about the best use of that money for taxpayers and reporting out on that is the best way to go.
This, of course, is put out, with the understanding that there's a wide perception out there, and the ECP go to town on this all the time, that the NDP are spendthrift, they're going to, ruin the budget again. To what extent do you think this, and having, Todd Hirsch, former ATB economist, insulates you from those charges?
Well, I mean, that will, of course, come down to the people of Alberta. They'll make that choice. It's not for me to predict what they will decide. But what I know is true is that we have always, when in government, relied heavily on the nonpartisan expert advice of folks who are simply trying to get the best outcomes. And this is a continuation of that pattern. And as I said before, we had to manage a dramatic drop in oil and gas revenues. We were dealing with about a third of the oil and gas revenues that had been in place prior to our election. We established a path to balance. We were hitting our targets, and I think that we actually had managed things in a pretty effective way. The UCP stumbled into $27 billion of non-renewable resource revenue last year, and they are reporting roughly a $10 billion surplus now. And we have no idea why they made the decisions they did. We didn't know why they were making the decisions they did when they made them. We're still not even 100% sure what the decisions are that they made at the time. And that kind of Wild West mentality with this kind of volatility and this amount of money that is taxpayers' dollars and citizens' dollars, that can't be allowed to continue. And so regardless of what it does for people's impressions of us, I think it's good, sound financial policy.
Todd Hirsch.
Yeah.
Mike Sonington, CBC News, Calgary. Todd, about the pension plan, there's been a lot of talk about it, maybe creating an Alberta pension plan. Is that serviceable? And in the way that, I'm hardly an economist, but in my own life, I compound interest, I save money, go to a bigger pool to take advantage of the compounding interest. Would there be an advantage to an Alberta pension? How would that work?
Well, it's way beyond the scope of what I was asked to report on, and the 37 experts that I consulted, we did not focus on the question of a pension plan. So I'm not prepared to speak to that. I'm not sure if Shannon or Rachel want to speak to that.
I can start. You can jump on in. So just to clarify what we're talking about here, when it comes to CPP, the best plan for the savings and the investments and the payments for Albertans who have contributed to CPP is that that money stay in the CPP. However, we also talked about above and beyond that, leveraging the expertise of both the Alberta Pension Service and AIMCO for private sector employers to work with their employees to set up a defined contribution plan, much like you described, where contributors get the benefit of free administration and that bigger pool of investment that comes through AIMCO. So it's basically leveraging value that we already have here in Alberta through the APS, through AIMCO, and offering it up to the private sector and regular folks to make sure they get access to it as well, so that they're not running around trying to manage their pension, figure out what stock to invest in, hire or fire, financial advisors, evaluate, mutual funds. I mean, most people don't have time for that, and this is, I think, probably a helpful way to help folks save for their future.
I was surprised to understand earlier today that Mr. Hirsch is not moving on with the campaign this past year with the party. Had you asked him to be a candidate or asked him to serve on the campaign?
I have had lots of good conversations with Todd over the years, and at a certain point he said he wanted to help, and I said, well, how would you like to help? And this was one of the options that came up, so I was very pleased that he said yes.
Okay, that's all the time we have today. We'll conclude it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.